The old man turned off the radio, said, "Where did all of the old songs go? Kids sure play funny music these days, play it in the strangest ways." He said, "It seemed to me like they've all gone wild. It was peaceful back when I was a child." Well, man, could it be that the girls and boys trying to be heard above your noise, and the lonely voice of youth cries, "What is truth?"
Hello, that was a strange little feedback there. Bill, are you there?
Yes, I am. That's that's not very good. Okay, just tweaking things here.
Okay.
And
I thought I was in a flying saucer from the 1950s.
Exactly. 1950s is what we're interested in here, for sure. Okay. So
I want you to know I'm happy to talk about anything and everything.
Oh.
Yeah. So I just wanted to get that out. We don't have to talk about Corey Goode. And I thought, what is the point if we're not going to get into that?
Yes. Let's just agree the ground rules then. It would, of course, be hard not to name any names at all. Otherwise, you're just going to go around in circles making
exactly
oblique references, which aren't really going to mean very much. But at the same time, I don't want to get personal and critical and nitty-gritty on things. If we're talking about individuals, I want to be talking about their evidence, their testimony, what they're claiming, and how we all deal with that.
I'm with you completely on this.
If we can do that in a way that meets the highest good, then I think that we'll probably be on the right track.
But no, I think that we can do this very well, Bill. We know each other. We know where we're coming from. And I don't want to get personal at all, but we want to keep it relevant.
All right. In terms of the timescale, I do not know how long it's going to take, and I do not know where we're going to go, or even how long it's going to take to get there.
Fine.
So, hello everyone, this is Bill Ryan here, and it's a great pleasure to present to you what I want to be a conversation, not so much of an interview, with Richard Dolan, who, for anyone who cares a jot about the subject matter here, will literally need almost no introduction, save that he's not just politically very informed and aware, and maybe the sanest person in ufology, or possibly anywhere else, for all I know, but he's a trained historian. And in that capacity, he knows not only a great deal about ufology, he's written some very important books and given more valuable presentations than I can easily count, but his latest book, which I think is published quite soon now, is about false flags. And that's relevant here because we're talking, besides many other things, about the history of strategic deception. And the reason I'm motivated to have this conversation with Richard is because I think historical perspective is needed on some of the recent issues that many in the so-called ufology community have been discussing and even getting quite heated about. And I do think that there are some things happening in ufology at the moment which are very dangerous and very concerning. And a great way to start this may be to quote a blog post of just a couple of days ago. That's the 4th of July 2017. This is recorded on the 6th of July. From Kevin Randall. And if anyone listening to this who cares about ufology doesn't know who Kevin Randall is, then I might gently suggest, in as kind a way as possible, that this may be an indicator of the kind of problem I want to discuss. Because Kevin's one of the elder statesmen of ufology. He's written a couple of dozen books. But who reads books anymore? Which is an interesting rhetorical question. And many of those books overlap with your own interest and passion, Richard, which is history. And one thing I want to discuss is that we may be losing our history. Because history doesn't reside in books or in dusty tomes or on forgotten websites. It has to be kept alive by people who know and understand it and how it informs our present. And one concern I have is that many in the field, including some folks who are they're passionate and motivated and aware and curious, and they're hungry for truth and information, but they may be relatively new to the field, and they weren't reading Timothy Goode's classic work Above Top Secret in the 1990s, and maybe they still haven't read it. They don't have the experience or the knowledge base, which isn't necessarily their fault, to evaluate the information coming at them through the internet by those who are keen to promote certain things for whatever reasons they have for doing that. So they're rather like consumers wanting their needs to be met. And that's where marketing comes in, because when some people see hungry consumers, they see financial opportunity, and maybe they see other opportunities as well. And here's what Kevin Randall wrote on his blog, which is kevinrandall.blogspot.com. This is the title of his blog. He starts off by saying, "Are some tales just too wild to believe?" Corey Goode and Andrew Basiago. And he says, "When I interviewed Jan Harzan recently, I expressed my concern about the direction of MUFON and some of those invited to make presentations at the symposium." And this symposium is coming up, I think, in just a couple of weeks from now. And then he continues, "I thought that some of the speakers were less than credible, thinking specifically about," and so on and so forth. And then he goes on to quote some details. And I was very pleased to read that, because it's my belief that we need to have more statements from those people who have a grounding in history and are well equipped to evaluate what's happening from a historical context. And at this point, Richard, I want to pass this over to you, and you can talk for as long as you like about anything you like.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for the nice introduction. And I'm glad that you framed the issue the way that you did by referring to Kevin Randall's recent piece, which I agree with you is important. So you brought up a few interesting things to open up with. Before we get into the issues with the UFOs and ufology today, why don't we talk a little bit about the history of covert operations and false flags that has affected ufology and as well as the rest of our recent history. And I don't want to do a long discourse on this, but it is true. I am working on a book on the history of false flags. This is primarily a 20th and 21st century study, and it's a very engrossing field. So what we can definitely say is that the United States, beyond any other nation, is the world leader in these types of deceptions. I mean, a false flag simply is an instance of a government doing something awful, killing people or slandering or doing other things, and then blaming it on another party. So there's a lot of that in our world, and the United States, in my view, is the leader in that. There are examples, both old and recent, to show that the United States policy has never varied in this regard. So you go back to the 1950s and 1960s, we had the FBI doing what was known as COINTELPRO, infiltrating organizations at that time to derail them, to discredit them, and so forth. That was Students for a Democratic Society, that was the Black Panthers, and that was many others as well. You would have agents inserted within those organizations, in other words, to radicalize them, to make them lose credibility, to start arguments within the organizations. This is an old game. The CIA, similarly, has been involved in this, most well-known internationally. We don't know of many or any confirmed cases domestically, but the CIA is every bit, or if not more, expert than the FBI at doing this exact same type of thing. We know that both of those agencies and other intelligence agencies have been interested in the UFO subject, and they have infiltrated. Back in the 1950s and 60s, the CIA, or shall we say, ex-CIA officials and individuals and agents permeated the UFO field. Organizations like NICAP back in the 50s and 60s had a number of individuals who were former CIA who had positions of great authority within NICAP. And furthermore, those individuals have been argued to be responsible for the destruction of NICAP. That's a long story. We don't need to go into the details, but I think that that's a correct argument to make, and I've made it myself in previous books. Through the 1970s and 80s, during the era where the Freedom of Information Act was threatening once again to derail the secrecy, this was a new development. UFO researchers could petition the government for documents from the U.S. government for the first time, starting in the late 70s. And, at that time, I think no one really knew what was likely to come out. If you were in charge of keeping the secret, you might well be concerned in the late 1970s by the hundreds and then thousands of pages of documents that were being released. And so what happened? Well, the evidence points to a kind of counterattack by the intelligence community in the form of the MJ-12 documents. And I am not one of these people who argues unilaterally, by the way, that all of the MJ-12 documents are fraudulent. I have a very difficult time with that argument. However, having said that, I do think the MJ-12 documents were very likely introduced as a way to create disinformation and sow discord. You can put true information out into the world in such a way that it is not credible or not confirmable, thereby discrediting it. That's a very, very sophisticated and long-standing intelligence community tactic. So, in other words, you put the truth out there and you frame it in such a way that no one believes it, and it's like getting an inoculation from a virus. That is, you get a little bit of that virus, but your body develops the antibodies against it, and you're now inoculated against, in this case, the truth. So I think that's what happened with MJ-12, and that was in the 1980s. Through the 1990s and 2000s, there is every reason to believe that the intelligence community has maintained its involvement. It's harder to prove these as we get into more recent times. But I personally have spoken with individuals who've had their own connections with CIA, who have told me point blank that the CIA continues to follow the UFO field very carefully. I've spoken with individuals who've had other information from me that branches of military intelligence are very interested in the UFO field. So just starting with all of that, all right, we have a government, we have an intelligence community that A, has a history of infiltration and disruption, and B, maintains an interest to this day in the UFO subject. And of course, it would have to. The UFO subject is too important for it to ignore. This may be funny to someone who thinks that this is all nonsense, some professional skeptic or scientist who thinks that they know everything about all there is to know about UFOs, but I can assure that person, if they're listening, that they don't know, and that within the intelligence community there are many, many brilliant individuals who take this very seriously. So that's to start. Let me jump into my thoughts on a secret space program. Long before anyone heard about Corey Goode, I've been offering my own thoughts on the existence of a secret space program. Back in 2011, I think was the first year that I made public statements about it, public presentations. And my position then and now is that there is a secret space program, and almost certainly using very advanced technology that's off limits to most of us. So that's a fairly radical position, and if you like, I can go over my reasons for that. I'm happy to. I try to base my evidence on what is safe, what is confirmable, and that's the skeleton, and then I try to build my edifice from that skeleton. And admittedly, like when you have a skeleton, it's okay to speculate, in my opinion. I try to be very clear about my speculations, however, and people can accept them or not accept them as they want. In my opinion, the argument is very strong that there is an advanced clandestine space program that is in existence that goes beyond Earth orbit, probably goes to the moon, probably goes to places beyond the moon. That might include Mars, and that might include elsewhere even beyond that. And again, I realize as someone who's uninitiated, that may sound out really, really crazy and out there, but I'm happy to explain why I think so. So I've been arguing this for a while. And then beyond that, we get a whole spate of recent claims. So it's one thing to make one's case based on evidence that comes from a variety of leakers and sources, leakers that can be confirmed, by the way, people whose identities can be confirmed. And it's another thing to claim to be one of those individuals with an outrageous story when you yourself cannot confirm your own identity. And what's obvious is that the field of ufology has been hit with a number of these individuals, and I use the word hit very deliberately here, who are making claims that are not only impossible, if not nearly impossible to confirm. They haven't yet been confirmed, but their own identities are not confirmable. And if you want to qualify as a whistleblower, this is a phrase that's been very, very overused in our field. If someone wants to qualify as a whistleblower, it seems to me that the first thing about them is that they themselves must have a background that is confirmable. We have to know who they are. So if I can't confirm that such and such a person went to a 20-year space program, for example, or if I cannot confirm that they went off and fought reptilians on Mars, or if I cannot confirm that they were part of a program since childhood to time travel. I mean, none of these things can be confirmed, and so therefore they cannot be considered whistleblowers. That's the first thing. Last thing I just want to mention here, and then we can go back and forth on this, Bill, is the idea of falsifiability. I'm sure you know what this is, but for someone who doesn't. So in philosophy and science, a concept, for it to be valid, needs to be falsifiable. Not false, falsifiable. In other words, if you're making a claim to me about something, I have to be able to prove or disprove it. If I have no way of proving or disproving it, it might be true, after all, but it's not valid scientifically or philosophically. It's not fair, in other words, to make such arguments, because I have no way to judge or corroborate what you're saying. For any field, any discipline, to be on solid footing and to be able to move forward, it has to have data that is falsifiable. And this is particularly so for ufology, in my view, because we are already way out there on the fringe. We don't get mainstream respectability. We're struggling to get a hearing in the court of mainstream media and science. And so it's especially important for us, for those of us who wish to defend ufology, and I'm one of those people. It's very important, in my view, that those of us who seek to represent this field comport themselves in a way that's worthy of this subject. And this is an important subject, and we've got to be able to present our evidence the best way possible. Look, there are hundreds and maybe thousands of people out there with us in their crosshairs, and they want to take this field down. They want to take it down. And it's our obligation, for those of us who are responsible, to do our best to defend this subject and not to treat it as something that certainly appears to be a money-making and sensationalist type of a scheme, which, from an outsider's perspective, I think a lot of these stories seem exactly that way. So that's my attempt to frame this, and we can go back and forth on that. What do you think?
What do I think? Okay. One thing which I immediately wanted to pick up on was the really important point that you made just at the very end there, when you were talking about, in some way, impossible though it may be, to try and keep the field respectable from the point of view of the people who are pressing their nose against the glass, wondering what all these crazy people are talking about. And I'm as sure as I can be that one of the strategies of those who want to disrupt the field is to inject so much evident craziness into the field that any smart people, sane people, intelligent people, curious people, educated people who are genuinely curious, because one thing we can all agree on is that more and more people are starting to get curious about the untold truths in the world, is that they just walk away and go somewhere else because these people are clearly nuts. And an interesting example of this was just the other day when Robert David Steele, for goodness sake, went and talked to Alex Jones about child slave colonies on Mars.
I did not hear this, so I'm very interested.
So this is Robert David Steele, a CIA whistleblower, go figure, who suddenly has picked up a lot of this information that is coming from some of these whistleblowers, in inverted commas, and talked to Alex Jones, this is just a few days ago, literally, about child slave colonies on Mars, with Alex Jones listening attentively.
Seriously. You know, for years, Alex Jones has used the phrase that I introduced, breakaway civilization, for years. He's never had me on a show, and he brings this guy on. That's almost funny to me.
It's more than funny.
Yeah,
it's really
tragically, it's sad.
And you see, we have to ask the question whether things like this might be being choreographed in some very clever way. And those people who have an agenda to disrupt this field, we must make no mistake about how clever and how experienced they are. They know all about how to do this. Because what happened after this is that NASA, I mean, this is extraordinary. The strategy that most of the government complex has about dealing with Alex Jones is to either ridicule him or ignore him. But what NASA did was they put out a statement denying this, which is extraordinary. And then what that does is that then hits the mainstream news saying NASA have denied this ridiculous claim that's been made on the Alex Jones show, and we all know who Alex Jones is, by this so-called CIA whistleblower, and aren't these people all insane? And
right, so it only works to discredit the rest of us.
It only works to discredit the rest of us. And it's a perfect example of what you were talking about. And interestingly enough, this is an aside which I found curious. I have a mutual friend who knows Robert David Steele quite well, and he was very keen to broker an interview between me and Steele to talk specifically about this issue. And I would have been very polite and very professional, but I would have gone head-to-head with him about the basis of the information on which he was making his claims.
Right.
And I got a response from him indirectly that he wasn't going to talk about it anymore, apart from one interview that he was going to do with Michael Salla. And I thought, it looks like something that is happening here behind the scenes.
Yeah. We are, as a society, we're enclosed within what I call a fence. It's a very circumscribed fence. With technology that we're allowed to have access to, with cosmology that we are allowed to have access to. And beyond that fence, it is a reality that is advanced and that is vastly beyond what we have. And so there are a lot of things are possible beyond that fence, as I see it. So among those things, all kinds of infrastructures are possible, in my opinion. That could be colonies on the moon and Mars. I do not rule that out at all. In fact, we have a long history of whistleblowers, real whistleblowers. I think of people like Carl Wolf. I think of people like Donna Hare. Wolf over at the U.S. Air Force in the 1950s with a top-secret crypto clearance, assigned to the NSA to do equipment repair, and talked about what he saw there, including mosaic images, digital images, some of the earliest digital images of the moon, the backside of the moon, which showed artificial structures, and he's very upfront about that. Donna Hare, who was a technical illustrator back in the early 70s, working for the NASA contractor Philco Ford, similarly has had a lot of detailed information about this, and she was in a good position to know what she knew, and talking about how the Apollo program was encountering UFOs on a regular basis, that there were things going on the moon and so forth. And other whistleblowers as well have talked about this. And then on top of that, we have stories in the 1980s, the so-called ARV, Alien Reproduction Vehicle story, which I credit. This is from Brad Sorensen, and he talked about having seen 3 hovering flying saucer-type craft at the Lockheed Hellendale facility in 1988, a 4-star general giving a lecture about how these craft had gone throughout the solar system by then, 1988, almost 30 years ago. I never met Brad Sorensen. I know a number of prominent individuals who interviewed him at great length, and they are all satisfied that he was telling the truth. So there's a lot of reason to think that there's off-the-charts technology, and that could include bases on the moon and beyond. And maybe that could include an alternative 3 scenario. Maybe it could include child slavery, as Steele was talking about. I don't know, and I don't deny. I mean, I don't have enough information. As crazy as it sounds, I don't feel that we can rule such things out. Having said all of that, the main point is the one that you made earlier, which is if someone were in charge of protecting their secret space program from discovery, they would very probably find individuals who have zero credibility in the mainstream, and they would encourage them one way or another to tell their story. They would perhaps help those individuals get access to publicity within the field. These days, it's so easy to do because there are a number of individuals always willing to put a camera and a microphone in front of such people. They become the new rock stars. They become the new darlings of the movement, and they get a story that gets thousands and maybe millions of people behind them. And the effectiveness of this is multifold. So one, it serves to discredit the actual secret space program in the mind of the general public. That's always helpful. Secondly, it will distract and derail certain researchers onto those paths of research, so they hit dead ends and they go off course from their genuine research. So it serves both of those 2 very important purposes. And, you know, if it's good for 5 years or 10 years, that's great. And then when they wear off, you just bring out more forms of disinformation. And these individuals, whether we're talking Corey Goode or whether we're talking Andrew Basiago or whether we're talking William Tomkins, for that matter, or any of these other people, Randy Kramer, some of these people I've met in person, others I have not. I'm not even denying that they're nice people. I met Andrew Basiago a number of years ago. He was actually a very decent person when I met him. But the real point is that it's entirely possible that there may be grains or kernels of truth in what some of these people are saying, or more, who knows. But from a research point of view, this is a truth that's almost useless to us because we can't use it from a research perspective. We can't use it to move forward in our public discourse because it's been tainted with ridiculousness. And again, I'm not making a claim here one way or the other about these people because I don't know any of them that well enough. But it is entirely possible that there's either mental illness involved with some of them or some kind of grand delusion that they have maybe been given. Were they once part of an intelligence community and just damaged through mind control in one way or another? Who knows? I mean, going back into the 1980s, I am well aware, and even before that, of cases, personally I know these cases, of people who have been, let's say, severely mind controlled by U.S. military. I know of several U.S. Air Force cases from around 1980 and the early 80s where techniques were used to completely scramble up someone's head. So the techniques are there. And I don't know if it's been used or not on any of these individuals. I have no way of knowing. Or if they are out there to make their money, or if that's their sole motivation, or if that combines with a genuine belief that they're telling the truth. The bottom line, though, to me, isn't really even the motivation of these people or their mental health, honestly. Maybe they're all mentally sound, and I'll be shocked, but maybe that's the case. The bottom line is that from a researcher's point of view, just to point out, say, Corey Goode, and I say this without trying to attack him personally. I have no interest in attacking him personally, none. But there's nothing in his story that I can, as a researcher, grab onto. There's nothing in his story that allows me to confirm or falsify any of his claims. I mean, in fact, it's not only that, but when we talk about the 20 and back program in particular and his way of recounting it, I have to have some serious problems with it because by its very nature, it is unconfirmable. By its very nature, he says he went for 20 years to another planet, I think from the age of 17, the best I can understand, until the age of 37. So during this period of time, became a young man and then a mature man, did his job, 20 years of one's life, and at the end of it, you could say, oh, well, great, so let's test those 20 years. Where were you? When he says, well, no, you can't do that because I became age regressed and time regressed so that his own mother apparently didn't even know that he was gone. Now, if any person were to come up to you with such a story, you would say, that sounds insane, and that sounds absolutely not believable. It sounds absolutely not believable. Even if we can manipulate time and space in such ways, even if this is possible. After all, I mean, space and time are not what our common sense tell us. This is true. We all, I think if we've looked into this, we understand that space and time are a fabric. That's why we call it the space-time fabric, and that they can be manipulated. Although we in our science have not yet figured out how to do that, as far as I can tell. Now, maybe a breakaway civilization has figured this out, but I would caution people from making the jump that a breakaway civilization may have certain advances that are far beyond us in terms of propulsion, in terms maybe of genetics and in other ways, maybe computing, artificial intelligence. But that doesn't mean that they are necessarily magical in every single facet. It doesn't mean that they can go through wormholes or jump rooms or time regress or age regress. I mean, we don't know. It's very possible a century from now, we will have open access to technologies that are utterly magical. But right now, the way it looks to me is that nothing of what he says is information that I can work with as a researcher that I can confirm or deny. And as such, it smells wrong and it feels wrong. The other thing I want to mention is, I attended a couple of Corey's lectures in the last year and listened very carefully to his lectures. And these aliens that he speaks of just so happen to speak the exact same language as any Southern California New Ager will speak. And I mention this because his message is tailor-made for that community, the consciousness, New Age, love and light community. And I'm not even trying to knock those individuals. I have a lot of friends who are very New Age, and certain elements of that belief system are fine for me. You know, I don't have a problem with it, but it's very obvious to me that the message is tailor-made, marketed, really, for that audience. So when I see all of these things together, I have to have reservations. I have to be suspicious even. So it is his obligation to be taken seriously to provide a way for researchers to corroborate. Now, Michael Salla, who's another person who will be at the MUFON Symposium, and I have known Michael for years, and I want to say right off the bat, I like Michael personally. I've always liked him, and he has a very lovely wife, and in my view, they are good people. But Michael has a different attitude toward evidence than I do, and he will say, well, Corey's testimony is corroborated by people like William Tompkins, and indeed people like Andrew Basiago and Randy Kramer. And maybe he's even mentioned Bernard Mendez, who I once a couple of times met and interviewed before his stories came out. And what I would counter is that this is not corroboration. All right, this is the easiest thing in the world to do, is to spend a certain amount of time studying the lore in a field. You can take 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever you need to study it and become an expert in it. And then you introduce yourself as the next whistleblower / witness / whatever. So that does not count as corroboration. If none of these people's backgrounds can be confirmed, if none of their stories can be independently corroborated by someone or something that can actually be confirmed, all right, then they don't count as evidence. Some years ago, I got into a one-day, all-day Facebook argument with Andrew Basiago about this very point. He said, well, my story is being corroborated by people like Randy Kramer and Bernard Mendez. And I said, well, no, it really isn't. And as a lawyer, I said, you ought to know better what constitutes valid evidence. All right, just because someone else can talk a good game doesn't mean that that's evidence. What we have here, unfortunately, are a series of really fun campfire stories, as I see it. They're not confirmable, and they don't count as intel or data. Some people call this stuff intel. I saw Corey Goode and David Wilcock on the stage, and David Wilcock consistently referred to this as intel, and that's wrong. This is not intel. That's sloppy language. It's not true either. So, again, I want to come back to this point that without getting personal with these people, I have no animus against any of them. But we get to a point where we have to defend this field of ours. And ufology deserves to be defended. And the only way we're going to get at these radical truths, which are at the core of this phenomenon, I mean radical truths, all right, is by being very careful with how we handle the evidence, especially in the public realm. I can tell you as a private researcher, and by the way, thank you for letting me talk for so long here, Bill. I can tell you as a private researcher, I have encountered a very wide array of claims that are, honestly, vastly beyond anything that has been discussed in this field in terms of the secret space program. I can tell you point blank, let's say a decade ago or so, and even less, I've received information that was incredibly, on the face of it, utterly radical. Utterly, utterly radical. And I never went public on it. I could have. What I had in my possession would have been absolutely explosive. But I was never able to not only confirm, but even corroborate any of it. And so I've kept it, because the last thing that I want to do is blow up this field with more claims that cannot be substantiated and thereby contribute to derailing the rest of us. And I will never, ever knowingly do that. So believe me, I am very familiar with outlandish claims. But we, particularly in the public realm, if we are serious about this field, have to be ultra careful and ultra responsible about public handling of claims and evidence. And, you know, when someone is out there promoting themselves to a specific audience with claims that cannot be not only confirmed or corroborated, but that on the face of it really do look as though they are tailor-made for self-aggrandizement, then yes, of course, we have to be very, very careful. And, I'm going to be on a stage with all of these individuals in 2 weeks. I will be on a panel with Michael Salla, with Corey Goode, with Andrew Basiago, and with William Tompkins on the secret space program. And, my whole career in this field, I have tried to avoid wars with people. It's a real waste of my time. I'm much more happy to go about my own research and to lead, if I'm going to lead, by that manner, rather than by getting into fights with people. But I also realize, when I'm on a stage, this is something that'll at some point be liable to end up on YouTube. It's there forever. So anything that I say on that stage is going to be up there for all time, as far as I'm concerned. And so I feel an obligation, A, to speak the truth, B, not to mince my words, and C, to do it responsibly and carefully. And that's what I intend to do when I'm up there. So.
Thank you. I really got all that. I've got a page of notes here, and I'm going on to the second page. Let me just support a couple of things that you've said here. There are a couple of small things, but I think they're important. And one is that you made a reference to how decent Michael Salla and Andy Basiago were. And I fully want to support that. I've met them both. I like Michael Salla. If he was my neighbor, I'd be delighted. He's a good man. If he knocked on the door and said, "Hey, I'm past," I'd say, "Michael, this is great. We'll put the coffee on. I'm so pleased to see you." He's a decent man. He's doing his best. And he's got different standards than you have, and I think I have. And maybe that's something we can talk about later, about research standards. But he's not trying to be deceptive. He's not trying to mislead anyone. He's doing his best. My personal opinion is that he's made some bad calls, but he's a decent man. And way back in the first half of 2015, I wrote to him on 2 separate occasions because I thought, okay, this guy's a researcher, he's interested in information, he's academically trained, and I wrote to him saying, "Michael, nice to be in touch with you. I've got some information here that may help you to do due diligence on some of the information which I think you may be running with. Can I please share that with you?" And here I was talking about some of the information which I knew personally about Corey Goode and his history, how his story has changed, and so on and so forth.
I think we may want to talk about that a little bit before we wrap up. I hope that we can.
Okay, sure. But Michael Salla surprised me considerably. He said, "Bill, it's good to hear from you. I hope that this conversation here is not going to be anything that will breach our friendship because I respect you," and so on and so forth. And we wrote very courteous emails to each other, as we both properly should. But he said, "I'm not interested in hearing what you have to offer because I am committed." That's what he said. Mm. And I thought, oh my God, this is now no longer a researcher. This is now somebody who has a belief system and is selectively collecting their evidence around them in order to support their belief system for whatever reasons they have personally. He didn't want to hear information which I had. There was just factual information. And that really surprised me. I think that's important.
I want to just jump in and add, it is critically important. So when we're in a field where everything is polarized, whether it's ufology or whether it's American politics to this day or the politics of any country, everything's so polarized now. We want to not ever listen to the opposition. It's a fatal mistake when we do that. Right? It's a fatal mistake in American politics when the two opposite sides don't want to listen. And in ufology, those who believe in the reality of this phenomenon must always listen to what skeptics have to say about everything, because often those skeptics are exactly right. And even when they're not right, they may be partially right. And even when they're not partially right, by listening to what they have to say, you can strengthen your own case if that's so, and that's a good thing too. But often, if someone has a contrary bit of information, that will prevent you, the researcher, from looking like a fool in the future. The only thing that keeps us in terms of our reputation, in terms of our value for the future, is adhering to the truth, because ultimately the truth is going to win out. And it may take years, it may take decades, it may take a lifetime or more, but ultimately that truth will win out. And it's always in the interest of every researcher to remember that. And the truth is hard The truth is a tough mistress, but it's the only sure way that we have. Bertrand Russell, one of the great skeptics, one of my great heroes, always said the difference between science and religion, scientific and religious thought, is it. Religious thought itself based on revealed wisdom, revealed knowledge that cannot be questioned, whereas science, as imperfect as it is, said Russell, has the advantage in that it will always be corrected, that all truths in science are provisional. They are not eternal. They are not for all time. They are provisional and therefore can be corrected. And if we are not maintaining that attitude, then we are maintaining what Russell called a kind of religious, dogmatic pursuit of the truth rather than a scientific pursuit of the truth. And I agree with Russell here that it's the scientific method that's the only way that we're ever going to advance.
It's about that falsifiability thing again, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's something that you said on your radio show a few weeks ago that I thought was, it was so neat that I actually wrote it down personally. It's like, look, you don't have to admit you're wrong. Just say, I've revised my opinion.
Yeah, right, exactly. My God, I've revised my opinion so many times in my life. I'm sure I will continue to.
Oh, my God. And just as you said, that's what good scientists should do. And I stress the word good scientists should revise their opinion in the light of new information. Otherwise, they're hooked into a belief system, they're hooked into being committed to a viewpoint, and then suddenly you're not doing research anymore. But there's something here I also want to say about Andy Basiago. And again, I'm not going to disparage the man, because I have exactly the same view about him as you do. He's a decent man. He's a nice guy. He means well. Something that not many people may know is that I was one of the very, very first people, certainly the first researcher in the ufology community, that Andy Basiago ever spoke to. This was in February 2007. And I had a 4-hour phone conversation with him that was unrecorded. I'd never spoken to him before. And it was so long, and it lasted so late, that at that time I was in Kerry Cassidy's apartment. She gave up and went to bed because she couldn't hear the conversation. And Andy told me at great length all about some of the stuff that many listening to this will already know about, that he's talked about. He talked about Project Pegasus,
right,
his teleportation experiments when he was a child. Now his father was in this year. He named names, he named locations, he went into this in very great detail for 4 hours. And 4 hours is a long time for somebody to give a personal presentation. And I'd never heard any of this before, and I was fascinated by it.
I want to interject and say that Andy he's not just very intelligent, he's brilliant at times. I mean, I've listened to him, and I marvel. I hope he hears me say this. Yeah. He's an exceptionally intelligent individual, in my view, from my perspective. I've listened to him enough times. Having said that, being brilliant is actually not sufficient evidence for someone on the scale of believability. That's actually, we have to keep that in mind. You can be brilliant, you can have many deep insights, but that doesn't make what you say true. So just want to put that out there.
I completely agree. And I've said many times, actually, that a high intellect can sometimes be an impediment to oneself in terms of the unconscious degree to which somebody who's very bright will justify their belief system to themselves. I've met many people with a very high intellect with extremely fixed ideas, and they're really, really good at justifying those ideas to themselves. It's interesting stuff. But the point I wanted to make here wasn't to talk about Andy and his Project Pegasus story, but to say that at that point, in February 2007, in 4 hours of detailed conversation, when he was laying out his whole life to me, and I was listening carefully, he never mentioned Mars, ever, in that conversation. That came later, you see. Very interesting. That came later. And the first time I met Andy in person was when Kerry Cassidy and I were filming our pilot TV series. This is back in the middle. It was in July, I think, 2010. And Andy was going to be on the program, and we picked him up at the airport and we met him. I never met him in person before. And we did a bunch of filming and all this kind of stuff. And then I sat and had lunch with him, and I explained to him gently and carefully and kindly that there had to be the possibility that the reason why he was now talking about Mars and jump rooms and all that kind of stuff was A, to discredit his own prior story, because by any standards he was starting to look ridiculous, and also to discredit the other people who've been talking about the secret space program, just as you and I were talking about a little earlier.
Right.
And this was the interesting thing, because as you said, Andy's a very bright guy, and he listened politely and he listened carefully. And there was no antagonism in our conversation at all. He had the greatest difficulty understanding what I was trying to say. And I'm not that bad at explaining things to people. And he had real trouble. After about half an hour or 40 minutes, he finally grasped the idea that what I was trying to tell him was that in some way, unknown to him, he had been interfered with in order to discredit not only his own story, but the story of others.
Right.
And I will be the first to say that he absolutely believes everything he's saying. He's not being willfully deceptive. And in the context of that TV show that we were filming, later on this afternoon, it's a great shame that this never made it into the program because, the whole thing was hilarious. What the producers had done was they got hold of a body language expert, Dr. Lillian Glass, Glass. She's a lovely woman, very smart. She's a real expert. And her whole profession is about helping law enforcement evaluate whether witnesses are likely to be telling the truth and all this kind of stuff. She's good at what she did. And we introduced Andy Basiago to her, and Andy told his story straight out.
Yes.
And Lillian listened very carefully. And this was all, it's like a 10-minute slot, and he told his story, and then he left the room, and all the cameras were rolling. And then Carrie and I came in, and Lillian's eyes, bless her, they were popping out of her head, because she'd never heard of a secret space program or anything like this. This was all nonsensical talk as far as she was concerned. She just said, well, I don't understand any of this, but I can tell you that he believes everything he's saying.
Right.
And it's a shame he didn't make it into the program. And so that's not exactly the same as a polygraph, but actually it's the next best thing. And she said...
I agree. And I think this is an assessment. Most of us who have met him will agree with that.
Yeah.
That he's not being deceptive intentionally in any way.
Yeah. This is a huge rabbit hole that I don't know if you've got time to go down, but this whole mind control thing, this is a glib word that everyone throws around, but it's something that you did mention earlier. The advantage of that as a weapon in this kind of quiet war that's going on here is that somebody who, for whatever reason, has been influenced or controlled or whatever to absolutely believe what they're saying, they are the very best false witness that one could wish for. You see, they're an ideal asset from the point of view of anyone who wants to place that asset into the community, in the words I think that you used in a presentation that you gave a little while back, to lay waste to it. That these are exactly the kind of assets that you want.
Yeah, all of your points about that I think are very well taken. I agree with you. And I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point within our lifetime to confirm, are these people mentally managed to say what they are saying, to lay waste to the field. We can suspect it, we can wonder, we can speculate, but I'm not going to know, and I don't think you're going to know, unless we get access to some secret cache of information. We're just not going to know the answer to this. So my approach is, I think this is yours too, understand that this type of thing goes on and has gone on, that is intentional disinformation. Mind control, we haven't really gone into that in this episode, but anyone who has looked into it knows that the history of mind control is deep and dark and terrifying, actually. There's a lot of it that's been going on for generations. It is entirely possible to get inside someone's head and make them believe certain things. If you doubt this, just look into the mainstream research of someone named Elizabeth Loftus, for goodness sake, and that'll get you started. There's no issues here in terms of managing someone's mind. I don't know if that's happened to any of these people. There's a lot of possibilities here, and we may never know the truth. But what we can know is that when a story cannot be confirmed by any independent examination, then we have to be careful. Now, there's another thing about this. Take someone like William L. Tompkins, for that matter, which we haven't really gotten into him. I will just mention that I had the opportunity some years ago to be the publisher of William Tompkins' book. I can say this now. Robert Wood approached me, and I'm very good friends with Dr. Bob Wood. Bob's in his 80s. He approached me a couple of years ago because I had published his book a couple of years ago. He wanted to know if I would be willing to publish a book by this major whistleblower, as he described it, from the 1950s and 60s, who had a lot to say about a secret space program. This guy, he said, had great credentials, bona fides, with Douglas Aircraft. And I said, sure, absolutely. And I took the manuscript and I went through it and was absolutely horrified by the manuscript. I don't know if you've read this book at all, Selected by Extraterrestrials.
I tried to read it. I got to about 100 pages in and I couldn't read any more. I thought...
It's a terrible book. Okay, let me just say, it is a terrible book. Now, the thing about it, and I can tell you all the reasons why it's terrible, but Tompkins, like Andy, and like some of the other people, can give a very detailed interview, and did one. I think he gave like a 4-hour plus interview with Linda Moulton Howe. He can get into the technical specifications, and he can talk about the details of the program that he says he was knowledgeable of and involved in. So these people can tell detailed stories, and Michael Salla has used Tompkins' story in great detail, and he's using it to corroborate Corey Goode. And I mean, there's a certain power to a detailed story told by an intelligent person, right? I mean, that's a powerful way to get a story across. Someone with a good intelligence and a lot of detail is going to be persuasive to many, many, many individuals. The key is we have to be careful in understanding what constitutes evidence. I just add, in the case of Tompkins' book, it was a terribly written book. I mean, just beyond bad. And I've seen a lot of bad manuscripts. I mean, I am a publisher. People send me their manuscripts all the time. Most are not well written. Most people just aren't very good writers. So that's fine. And if you're trying to just understand how to get to the truth, you can look past bad writing and incompetent organization and the rest. But what made his book particularly damaging was the fact that despite that this man is in his mid-90s, all right, he honestly came across with the emotional maturity of someone who was 11 years old in talking about the hot Star Trek-like alien babes in miniskirts in the 1950s over and over and over and over again. Some of this may just be cultural baggage from his generation. I get that, okay? Nonetheless, the personality that comes through in this book is not a dignified personality. It's easy to laugh at. So as I was reading it, I just thought, this could be completely true. I mean, maybe, but I mean, in theory, it could be completely true. But it is presented in such a way that without being completely rewritten word for word, it's a book that required a complete, total rewrite. I said, there's no way that this book will be released by my publishing company. I don't care how much money it makes. I don't want that money. And I sent it back to Bob. I said, you do what you want with it, but I'm not publishing this book. It makes very good money. I mean, that book sells very well. I look at its rankings periodically on Amazon, and I think, gee, I could have been making some of that money, but I'm very glad that I'm not. I don't want that money. So the point is that some of this information, I mean, a guy like Tompkins, a guy like Andy, even a guy like Corey Goode, they're able to talk in some detail about elements of their program. And to someone who is a new person to the field, who doesn't know their history, these people can sound very impressive. But the thing is, we have to come back and ask ourselves the hard question that any investigator would ask. Is it possible to confirm or corroborate any of this with legitimate corroboration? And the answer, as I see it, so far has been no. Now, Michael Salla's latest book, which is about Tompkins, and I have a copy of it, and I'm reading it, is an attempt to do, I think it's an attempt to do what I've just said, to sort of put the story together with the best evidence. And I will say this on Michael's behalf. He has done a good amount of research to try to build a case. My complaint is that a lot of that research seems to be based on uncorroborated testimony from interviews given by other people. Not all of it, but a good portion of it. So I don't know how strong a case ultimately he's going to make. I suspect that I'm going to have problems with it when I'm done with the book. So ultimately, if we're dealing with historical figures who are no longer alive and they're gone and we have access to some information, we can try to make a determination. Are they working for the CIA or not, or whatever? As it is right now for these people, I'm not interested in speculating along those lines because they might be and they might not be. But to me, that's less important than the immediate story, them telling stories that are, from a researcher's point of view, pretty much useless. I don't know what to do with most of these people's stories. There's nothing for me to delve in. There's no names. Whether it's Andy or Corey or, for all I know, Randy Kramer, what are the names of some of their colleagues? What are some of the details of what it was actually like really like, to live in their program? What was it like to spend 20 years of your life? It's not going to work for me for you to say, well, I only had this one little job and that's all I was, everything was compartmented. I'm not buying it, all right? To live 20 years of your life from age 17 to 37 and not give the world a feel of what that was really like. I'm sorry, but if you want to persuade the rest of the world to get on board with your story, you need to do a little bit more than that. Now, maybe after he hears me say this, he'll come out and do that. I don't know. I think it's noteworthy for us to chat about the evolution as you see it, because you guys over at Avalon have been doing some work on this, the evolution of Corey Goode's story. Before you do that, I want to say one thing on his behalf. I'm surprised, but I'm going to say this, because I know where we're going to go with this, which is that it is, I think, confirmable from everything that you guys at Avalon have been doing, that A, his story has evolved from the first time he started mentioning it on the Avalon message boards years ago, and that also you're able to determine that he had done a great deal of quiet research through Avalon on all the other alleged Mars whistleblowers and became familiar with their story. Now, what I'm going to say in his defense is this. If I were genuinely someone who had started to remember that I was part of a secret space program, let's just say that that was me, that's a hell of a thing to have to deal with personally. And one thing I would probably want to do is to research other whistleblowers and find out what they have to say. So in that sense, it wouldn't be necessarily a sign of deception, right, that someone is attempting to learn about other whistleblower stories, although it could be. I mean, the other side of it is that if I were to try to make up a story, then, yes, clearly I would want to become familiar with the lore and the stories and claims that are out there. So it seems to me that the fact that he did prior research, as I know you're going to talk about, before coming public with his own story, I interpret that as it could go either way. I mean, in theory. In practice, it looks more like one thing than another. It looks more like this is intentional creation of a story and intentional deception. But I leave open the possibility that it doesn't have to be. Okay? So with that, I'm going to hand you the talking stick.
Okay, so let me just say a couple of points about that, because you're quite right, it can go either way. For example, one could refer to the fact that someone's told a certain story before and say, well, look, this is evidence of plagiarism. And you could also say, well, someone's told the story before, so it's corroboration. But one has to take these data points into account. And one, for example, is that somebody whose name has changed quite a number of times over history, but who now calls themselves Ashayana Dean, was writing about blue avians back in the late 1990s.
Oh, right. I'm glad you're getting into this. So yeah, keep going.
Yeah. Now, somebody could cite that as evidence against the thesis, which I and others have sometimes said, look, in all the history of abductees and contactees and channel messages, no one has ever really talked about blue avians before. This is something that's right out of left field, totally new and unlikely to be true because it's not matched by anything that's ever been reported before, etc., etc. But this has been written about before. I do not know whether Corey was looking into Ashayana Dean's books, which he wrote back in the late 1990s. Mm-hmm. Something very similar, and it's a big thing because the blue avians are like a central plank of this story. Another central plank of this story is what he has called the 20 and Back program. But that first was published by Stephanie Relf, who is the wife of Michael Relf, who is in the Navy. And Michael started to want to explore some strange memories that he thought he had that were coming up in fragmented form and asked his wife, who is a trained counselor, to help him get to the bottom of what it was that these images and fleeting fragmented memories were all about. And she did all of that over quite a period of time. And eventually, to Michael's astonishment, he came to the conclusion that he had been part of what is now called this 20 and Back program. That was published in 2 books by Stephanie Relf in the year 2000 called The Mars Records 1 and 2. They're freely available on a website called themarsrecords.com. And what's interesting about that, though, I mean, it's an extraordinary, unverifiable, unfalsifiable story, to use your words from earlier on. But what Stephanie and Michael Relf did is they did the best that they could, which was they transcribed and documented in the books all of the regression sessions in detail. So you could actually follow, it wasn't a paper trail, but it was a regression session trail when you could actually relive Michael's experience of, to his great astonishment, recovering these memories and putting all these jigsaw puzzle pieces together. Now, that doesn't mean that that was true, but it does mean that they were doing their best to present an extraordinary story. They didn't get rich from it, they weren't given a television show, they didn't do anything except just put the information out there. But the point here is that it is almost certain that Corey Goode knew about that, and the case can be made that he was hanging his story on that big coat hook, because it's something that had been established before. And recently, Stephanie wrote to me, which is after I'd done my 3 interviews with Daniel List, the dark journalist, about all of this. And this is what she said, and I read it right here. Dear Bill, thank you for your words of support, Ray the Mars Records, and enlightening people about Goode. We've posted your interview at themarsrecords.com. Best regards, Stephanie Relf. Stephanie and Michael totally believe that Corey's story is clear plagiarism. Just a copy and paste of what they'd written about in detail 15 years earlier. And I'd maintain that this is significant. He stated about a month ago, after I asked him the question publicly, that he would not do a regression because he said regressions were invasive, which, as any therapist knows, just is not true. So while Michael Relf was really keen to do regression sessions to find out himself what might have happened to him, it's curious and it's meaningful that neither Corey Goode nor Andy Basiago have ever wanted to do regressions on record, as John Burroughs did in the famous Bentwaters case, which is a very brave thing for him to have done on record to substantiate his own story. And exactly the same thing with Andy Basiago. This is another unverifiable story, which many listening to this will know about, that the Camelot witness in 2006-2007, who we gave the pseudonym Henry Deacon to, his real name is Arthur Newman.
Yes.
He talked about going to Mars in something that I called a jump room. It was me who coined the term jump room.
Did you? I did not know that, Bill.
I coined that term. The word jump room didn't exist until I invented it, because I wanted to put out a video which was my debriefing to David Wilcock about all of this, and he didn't know what was coming, and we caught him in the back of a restaurant, and we turned on the cameras, and I told him this story, and I called it Jump Room to Mars. That can be found on the internet. Jump Room to Mars. It's Henry's story, which is an extraordinary story. What this device is actually called, it's called, well, this is what Henry said the device is actually called. I can't prove that it exists. It's called the corridor. It is not called a jump room. Now, that's a big rabbit hole that we don't have time to go down. But the point there, and here we're talking about plagiarism, whether it's conscious or not, is that Andy Basiago has continuously used the word jump room to describe his own experience in going to Mars. He's not referring to it by its ostensibly correct name. He's referring to it by the name which I invented.
You know, wouldn't one think that if you're going to steal, if you're going to make up a story, don't steal terminology invented by someone else. Like anytime that if I ever hear a whistleblower talk about the breakaway civilization and how the breakaway civilization sees itself, I'm going to probably know that they're making that up since I know the origin of that. And the same thing with Jump Room. Like, why?
Yeah.
Why would someone do that? Anyway, go on.
Okay. Anyway, so what we were talking about there, and there's an enormous data set that we don't have time to go into, and it's all a little hard to do it on an audio because it actually needs it needs links and it needs a document. And I've actually got this document out there, at least in partial form, and in the YouTube description, which we'll put up, I will link to that so people can actually check links on the internet and see exactly what it is I'm referring to here. But yes, his story did evolve, and for quite some time on Project Avalon, when Corey was a member in good standing, is at quite some length, but in not a lot of detail. He would talk about this and that and things that he'd heard about and things that he thought and things that he suspected. And it was sort of interesting stuff, but a lot of people on forums do that kind of thing. And there was nothing like the scale, magnitude and volume of the information which he started to come out with once he had a TV platform with David Wilcock. And extraordinarily, and I often kind of look in the mirror and think, oh my God, how did I get tangled up in all of this? Is with all honest to God good intentions, back in October 2014, I took an interview that my then wife, Christine Anderson, did with Corey at his Dallas home on 2 separate days, a week apart, when, with Corey's knowledge, and the children were playing and there was kind of noise all around, and she just put a little dictaphone on the table and talked to Corey, and then gave me all this raw audio and said, look, is there anything you can do with all of this? And I thought, okay, here's a challenge. And the quality was bad. Corey was hesitant. He was talking about how he couldn't think very clearly. He was on medication. He was in some pain through a shoulder injury. And he talked very hesitatingly.
Is it fair to guess that he gave a very, very tiny fraction of what he's later talked about?
It was a tiny, tiny fraction of it. It was interesting enough for me to cut it into an audio. I spent a lot of time on it because it needed.
So what was the core? What was the tiny fraction that he was giving you in that interview?
Well,
that he went to Mars? A lot of us would be interested to know, like, where was he when he first started this? How did this story evolve? Does it appear that it evolved in a way that just kind of grew and grew and grew and grew so that it became then just not believable? Is there a believable core, I guess I'm asking you?
He talked about the fact that he felt he was part of some classified program and he was trying to remember it. He did not talk about the 20 and back thing at all. And Christine never actually asked him, well, hang on a minute, how do you shoehorn this into your life? Because there's no room. I mean, this became crystal clear later, that there's no room in his resume for any of this to fit in there. Right. Because it takes years and years to do this kind of stuff. And you see gaps in some, et cetera, it's all obvious. He talked about being a delegate to something which was the equivalent of a kind of United Nations style grand meeting between different ET races, with the human race being a kind of low-level add-on to all of this, junior delegates in this whole thing. And Corey and 2 other people were there as chosen ambassadors to represent all of humanity because they had the intuitive, empathic ability to understand what these strange ETs were trying to say and communicate. That kind of thing.
Has he maintained that statement? I don't remember that.
I believe he has.
He has, okay.
What he didn't talk about the Blue Avians at all, at any stage. I mean, where did they come from in this wildly evolving storyline? And like Andy Basiago, he didn't talk about Mars at all. There have been other extraordinary things that he's talked about since, almost as if, and I absolutely have to say this, almost as if he had to keep on coming up with content. The very first UFO conference I ever attended, I think this is the first time I met you, which is back in Laughlin, Nevada, in February, March 2006.
Yeah.
I was taken aside by a kindly elder statesman of the UFO community. I've forgotten his name. He was a kind man. He took me aside Actually, it might have been Ted Rogers. That name is coming to me now. And he said, look, I've got to tell you about UFO disease. And I said, what is UFO disease? He said, UFO disease is what happens when people suddenly find themselves in the limelight, suddenly find themselves the center of attention, with everyone wanting interviews and everyone wanting them to tell their story, and they keep on asking and they keep on asking, and you've got to keep on coming up with new material, otherwise you're famous for only 15 minutes. He said, beware of that. And those were wise words that I've never forgotten.
Yeah. Good advice.
Yeah, no kidding. And just in the context of that, I mean, I know quite a lot of stuff, and I've had some strange experiences myself, but I couldn't fill up a year's worth of TV episodes, no matter how much you paid me, without inventing. It's like, I just don't have that amount of stuff to tell. I just don't. And just to kind of share that joke, I suspect that you might not either.
No, I don't.
But,
I mean, I'm happy to talk about all kinds of things, and but to continually come up with new stories. See, I have it easy. I can come up with fresh analyses and to reinvestigate other cases. That's limitless. I don't need to come up with stuff that I am personally digging out and I'm ferreting out, and it's all about me. Fortunately, I've never been in the position where I've put myself in such a situation where, so for me, I'm able, and you are able to go where interesting evidence leads us, and that's more than enough for a day. That's great.
But so anyway, what happened, and at this point I'm really going to have to condense it, is that after Corey left the Avalon Forum, because lots of things blew up quite quickly, quite soon after that interview was published, he went to David Wilcock because it seemed that he was passionate about finding somebody who could believe his story and champion his story. And as best I understand, it was David who then introduced him to Gaia TV and said, look, we've got something marketable here. This is how we can get this message out to a whole bunch of people. Forget about forums and blogs. We're going to put you on television. That's my paraphrase, and that's what my understanding is of what happened. And what I also think happened, and other people have said that they share this view, is that then David coached him and fed him and presented him with information and encouraged him and sort of led him, almost like a lawyer in court leading a witness, to talk about things that he never mentioned before. And all of a sudden his story had grown arms and legs and was running around all over the place and was growing in stature and growing in size. And something which I then really want to talk about is the degree to which then that became a marketable commodity. And here we're in big trouble, because at this point I want to go back and talk about some of the wild tales, just as wild as some of the things we're hearing now, that came from the early contactees in the 1950s, people like George Adamski and George Van Tassel, and quite a bunch of others, who wrote a bunch of books. I mean, there are dozens of wild contactee books about people telling wild, unverifiable stories about going off to planet this and planet that. And the difference between then and now isn't the stories that are being told, but it's what's being done with the stories, because the internet didn't exist back then, Facebook didn't exist back then, Gaia TV didn't exist back then. There was no agenda, no commercial financial interest that sought to pick these people up and turn them into celebrities with some kind of a reason for doing so that may or may not have been stated. And now we're in a different era. And my personal view is that this is dangerous, because we've got corporate financial interests which are invested in these fields of ufology, and even arguably the field of spirituality, God help us all, so to speak, which is now marketing things to an audience. And this now loops back to what I said in my introduction, that we've got young people who are hungry for information, hungry for something to believe in, hungry for something to hang on to in a confusing world. And they're having their needs met by people who have a corporate financial interest in doing so. And maybe there's another interest behind that too. And this is dangerous, because we've never been in this place before.
Well, when you mentioned the contactee, I have shelves of contactee books from the 50s and 60s. I have a lot of them. I just picked one at random off the shelf by Howard Menger. He was one of them. His wife, Connie, the two of them had experiences. And I have first edition signed copies of Adamski's books, and I've got a lot of these others. And you're exactly right. So they're very, very similar in tone in that you've got stories. There's a kind of self-aggrandizement with all of them. Accounts of visitors from space. I'm looking at Howard's book here, From Outer Space to You, documented by actual photographs. And I'm looking at the photographs, by the way, and you cannot possibly take these photographs seriously. It's not possible. But he got a book published out of it, and he probably made some money and did get some fame and notoriety, by the way. There's definitely a motivation for these people to do what they're doing back 50, 60, 70 years ago and today. So that's never changed. And you're right that the internet, social media have the ability to amplify all of these claims and take on a life of their own, even much beyond anything that was possible in the 1950s. But back then, just as today, like these claims are not documented. In Adamski's case, for example, his famous meeting with Orthon, the visitor from Venus, Adamski back then got affidavits from his witnesses, including one, I think was Van Tassel, if I'm not mistaken, or no, some other well-known person was with him, and got them to sign affidavits saying that they saw him meet the alien. Turns out they didn't see him. They went with him to a spot. He walked to an area that was hidden, then came back and said, oh, yes, I met with this gentleman from Venus, and told them all about it. So very interesting. When you get close to the evidence, you find that it just moves away, it vanishes. That's always something to be careful of. Anytime you get close to the evidence, when it changes, be suspicious. It's often a lie or an operation of some sort. So fast forward to today, this part has not changed. Also, what hasn't changed is that there is a kind of a New Age style message that most of these people seem to have. It's all about, use phrases like ascension and densities and all the stuff that's very common within the New Age field today. I mean, we've been hearing this ad infinitum for years and years now. So it's a tailor-made message, almost as if it was concocted to market to a particular audience. And I'll just leave it at that. So again, all I have to say is I can't accuse these individuals of intentional deception. What I would like to see are researchers, and this includes folks at Avalon, if anyone is able to put together a reasonable case based on evidence of a kind of a dishonest evolution and aggrandizement and changing of the facts and so forth by Corey Goode or anyone, then I think the public needs to know what that is, and we need to really use that as part of the discussion. Let me just add, too, though, I'm a lot less comfortable with the allegations of satanic activity permeating the whole Corey Goode and Gaia thing, Gaia's company. I'm not comfortable with that. And let me just point out, I'm going to say this because I wrote and hosted and shot an extended series on false flags for Gaia TV. So let me just put that right out there. I'm not hiding that from anyone. The folks at Gaia asked me over a year ago if I would like to do something with them. I said, well, my research is on false flags. They said, fine. And I was invited to create a program on that. And by the way, I'm glad that I've done that. And I'm glad that I've had the opportunity to do it. And I'm assuming that show will air sometime over the summer. It would be very nice. I've been to the Gaia studio a number of times, many times. I know many of the producers there. I know many of the technical people there. I know the owner, not well, but I know him. I know the other senior executives and marketing people. I've met most of these folks. And I can tell you they are not Satanists. I don't believe it. I will never believe it until someone can find some kind of secret recording that just shows it all happening. I don't find this credible whatsoever. That's Gaia. So I just wanted to deal with that. And there are claims that like the satanic Gaia somehow took over the Conference of Contact in the desert. Sorry, no sale. That's actually not true whatsoever. And I know the lady who runs Contact in the desert, Victoria Gavoyan, and I mentioned this to her, and she said Gaia was one of over 20 sponsors of Contact in the Desert. All right, so to say that there's some satanic, I mean, this is absurd, frankly. Now, the other connection to this is Corey Goode's illustrator, who does certainly seem to have satanic connections, and that's certainly the case. I don't know their relationship well enough to make a determination about Corey Goode in this, all right? I know that if I were to hire someone to do my website, or if I were to hire someone to do work for me, I'm not always going to ask them what's their religion. I'm just not going to know. So if other people want to get into that whole relationship, and if they feel that it is significant, fine. My opinion right now is that this is a red herring, irrelevancy, threatening to derail us, and I don't know how significant that is. That's my thought on that. The last thing I'll just say here before you jump in is I'm trying at all times, all right, to keep my critique to the subject itself, not to the people. I don't care, honestly, about these people. I don't wish them well or ill. I don't care about them. They can live their life. They're not the subject of my interest. The subject of my interest is this subject of ours, and in defending it as it needs to be defended so that we can actually move ahead with proper investigations and get to the truth.
Okay, thank you. I got all that, absolutely. And I don't have any fundamental disagreement with you about any of that at all. Just to loop back slightly to what I was talking about before, which has got to do with various platforms meeting a need for their consumers, let me say. And I'm using that word consumer advisedly because this is the way in which marketing people think. And that also gives me the opportunity to loop back to what we started with again, which is what Kevin Randall stated in his blog piece a couple of days ago about MUFON. And there's something here to do with vetting, that what Gaia TV and MUFON and many other major conferences have in common is that they are the kingmakers in the sense that they have the power to put people on stage and promote them or not, as the case may be. And there's an awful lot that they can do to influence the interest of their audience. And what marketing people do, whether they're selling stories told by ostensible whistleblowers or whether they're selling soap powder, is they're creating a need and then filling it. And that's how marketing works. Anyone in the corporate world will affirm that this is one of the axioms of all corporate activity. I'd really like to ask you to comment on MUFON's responsibility in showcasing certain stories, because MUFON is held in respect by many people. And Gaia TV is kind of held in respect by a lot of people who say, well, look, it's on television, so it must be true.
So I'll say two things to say about this, MUFON and Gaia. So in case of Gaia, they're a company. They're out to make money. If someone doesn't recognize that, then I don't know what to say to them. They're a commercial entity. They have their market, started with yoga, moved into New Age, it's moved on to other things. And in my view, Gaia is entirely entitled to do what they want to do with their business model. You can subscribe to them or not. That's what a free market is about. And that's life. So if someone can critique them, have at it. Things there that can be critiqued, and there's things that you may agree with. So that's fine. That's their model. And personally, I have nothing to say against that. MUFON, I think, is a different thing altogether. So MUFON has overtly been for now over 40, almost 50 years. In fact, it is 50 years old this year, 1967, I believe. It is an explicitly research and investigative-driven organization. Now, they have to make their money, just like any organization does, and I understand that. But yes, we want to see standards at an organization like MUFON. We don't want to see MUFON pandering, as it were, right, to the latest trends that are out there. I spoke to Jan Harzan about this, and I've known Jan for a number of years, and his answer to me, because I did question this, and I said, you've got people on there that are very questionable in their credibility, to say the least. And his answer was, we're trying to give everyone a forum and just let the truth come out. And if they're debunked, then they're debunked. And if they're supported, then they're supported. And I thought, okay. And then he asked me if I wanted to pull myself from the panel. And I said, no, don't pull me from the panel. I'm going to be on that. So I can't really speak for MUFON. You can interview Jan yourself and ask him, and other people should interview Jan. Kevin talked to Jan about this, and I think that's absolutely fair. I'm inclined to agree with Kevin on this, very much so, that we should expect standards from MUFON. And I honestly, I was very surprised by the fact that they went there. And I'm in a difficult position here because I want to have a good relationship with Jan Harz, and I don't need anything out of MUFON. I was unofficially banned by MUFON for 6 years, for God's sake. Back in 2011, I spoke on the MUFON stage about their desperate need to reform. This was a huge issue in 2011 at the time. I had been a regular speaker for MUFON for years before that. And after I spoke out, the then director of MUFON, Clifford Clift, according to 2 separate witnesses who spoke to me, practically had a stroke listening to me and got so furious, he said that I would never speak at another MUFON symposium ever again. 2 people heard that. And I didn't care. I didn't care then, I don't care now. If MUFON were to ban me for life after things I say, then fine, let them. It's fine, I don't really care. I say what I say, but at the same time, I feel that there is good work that MUFON can still do, and I want them to do it. I so want MUFON to be a good organization because we need an organization like MUFON. We really do. We need, it's one thing for people to go into the depths of ufology and get into all the theories and the conspiracies. I get into that. I'm fascinated by that. But if we do not have an organization that is able to do genuine, detailed investigations of specific cases, then we're just spinning our wheels. We have nothing to grasp on to. We need an organization like MUFON. We need many organizations like MUFON. So I want to support them. I want them to do well. But I don't want them to engage in what seems to be sensationalism based on the need to improve their own bottom line. I understand the need for every organization to make its money. Look, I have rearranged my entire life, Bill, so that I am a full-time writer and publisher in the field of UFOs. I look back, I'm amazed that I was able to do it. I can survive, barely, but I can survive as a publisher and as a person in this field. I can pay my bills. Now, I have to ride that line too. There are opportunities that will always come along for me to sell out, as it were, or me to just go sensationalistic and do clickbait or get paid for things that I feel are beneath me or beneath this field. And I'm aware of this, and I'm continually seeking to guard against it. And that's the best that we can do, and MUFON needs to do the same. They're an organization. We expect more out of them. And so when they're engaging in what appears to be sensationalist panels and speakers and so on, I'm not happy about that. I'm not happy about that. It's not that these people don't deserve their own audience. It's a free world, so I'm told. And if people want to pay money to Andy or Corey or Bill Tompkins or Michael Salla for the things that they say, then fine, let them do it. At the same time, for those of us who are seriously engaged in this field and who take it seriously, we are also obligated, or at least allowed, to defend it as we need to. That's what freedom's about. Other people are allowed to have their word, and you and I are allowed to have our word, and we are allowed to express our opinions. My attitude is this. Look, I try to be careful with other people, but we're at a point where this is out there in the domain, and I am out there associated with it, if for no other reason than I'm going to be on the stage with these folks. And I know a lot of people have already been writing to me, talking to me. They have expectations that I'm going to lay it down and devastate these other individuals. And I just want to say, I'm not about devastating anyone, but I am about maintaining a standard when I am there and reminding attendees that these are important standards.
Standards is exactly what this whole thing is about. Really eloquently stated. There's nothing that you could say there, that you did say there, that I would possibly disagree with. I think an important thing to add, it's exactly as we were agreeing with regard to Michael Salla and Andy Basiago. Jan Harzan is a very decent man.
Yeah.
He means well, he's doing his best. He's got a hell of a job to do to try and pull all those MUFON threads together. My personal opinion, I would say to him in the most courteous possible way that I think he's making an error of judgment, and there's a certain responsibility which he has as the leader of MUFON that itself has a leadership function in this field when leadership really is needed. And if there's a leadership vacuum, then that vacuum is going to be filled by others who are going to use it for agendas that might not be about pure research. And that's one of my concerns here. So, yeah.
I'm going to jump in. This is something that I'm sure people listening will be like, wow, okay, I want to quote this one. When Clifford Clift first became director of MUFON back, I think it was 2008, I'm wanting to say, I had a lunch with him And he was very nice, and he said, look, I'd like to know your opinion on what are some of the things that MUFON needs to do. And I said, wow, I'm glad you asked me. I said, the first thing it should do is clean house. There's a lot of people in the upper leadership of MUFON who do not belong there. There's a lot of suspicious individuals who have connections with the U.S. intelligence, national security community. They should all go. They should all go yesterday. And I don't think Clifford was expecting me to say that, and he certainly didn't do anything about it. I would say the same thing today. So MUFON needs to clean house so desperately, it's not funny. There are good people in MUFON, and there are people who do not belong there. It's still an opaque organization in many, many ways. Who are these people who are running it? I'm not talking about Jan. I'm talking about a lot of other people near the top there. MUFON needs strong leadership. It needs an overhaul of personnel in many ways. I mean, if I were running that organization, I would have the list of all personnel in front of me. And I would go in like an HR consultant brought in to downsize. And that's what I would do. And then I would look into rehiring. Simple as that. And it's not been done. I don't think it will be done, unfortunately. I would want to start an organization that I can trust all the people in it that are actually doing what I want them to do. And I don't believe that this is the case. I sympathize with Jan's situation. I think he's doing the best that he can do or that he feels he can do. But I think MUFON needs strong medicine. That's all I'll say on that. Okay, thank you. That's a very powerful closing statement. I'm aware that you've got to go in literally a few moments. I do. This is starting to sound like a radio show now. I promise to anyone listening that it's not. Yeah, so thank you so much for this. It's possible, probable, that this story will roll and roll. I hope not I think forever. So. I'm sure that it will. And I think it'll be one of those things where people say, can you believe he said that and this and that? And particularly, I'm going to the MUFON event in 2 weeks, and it's not my intention to cause a big ruckus before I arrive there. But to be fair, the groundwork was laid for it by the individuals who are being brought in. And again, this is not a war that I'm having with them, but larger issues are at stake here, and the fact is they need to be discussed. Absolutely. So what this means is there'll probably be a little bit to talk about later. It'd be fun to continue this conversation. There's all kinds of avenues we haven't explored yet. But I really want to thank you for being so eloquent, practiced though you are. It's a delight to listen to you. It's been a delight to talk to you. Thanks, and Bill. Thank you so much. I think a lot of people will be more than interested to hear everything which you've laid out here on this very big table. Well, thank you. I've enjoyed talking with you. And it's funny, I don't say these things without a little bit of trepidation. That's the truth. But honestly, we gave the blogosphere a hell of a lot to talk about. No kidding. Well, thanks for coming out on record about all this stuff, because I know from what people have been communicating to me that everyone has been saying, oh my God, why doesn't Richard say this and why doesn't Richard say that? He's been sitting on his hands and he's been keeping so quiet. And now you've come out and you've blown your own whistle. Okay, well, there we go. Oh, good. Okay, very, very good. All right. Maybe we can do it again later, because I think that there will be some things to pick up later. But we can do a follow-up, yeah. I think so. I don't want this to roll on forever. I mean, I truly don't. I mean, it would be great if you and I said, you know what, we've got nothing to talk about anymore. It's all gone away. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm really glad we did this. And yes, we'll stay in touch. If you want to do a follow-up interview in the next 2 weeks, let's talk about that. We'll see. Okay, great. Right. Thank you. Later, Bill. Okay. See you later.
The old man turned off the radio, said, where did all of the old songs go? Kids sure play funny music these days, play it in the strangest ways. He said, it seemed to me like they've all gone wild. It was peaceful back when I was a child. Well, man, could it be that the girls and boys trying to be heard above your noise, and the lonely voice of youth cries, what is truth? And the lonely voice of youth cries, what is truth?